My son threw me away like trash, so I made sure he lost everything. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to destroy my own child's life. But sometimes, when someone you love with every fiber of your being treats you like garbage, you realize that blood doesn't always mean family. And sometimes, the only way to teach someone the value of what they've lost is to take it all away. My name is Margaret, and this is the story of how my son chose his wife over his mother, and how I made sure he paid the ultimate price for that decision. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you'd die for, stick around. This story might hit closer to home than you think. It all started 32 years ago when I held my baby boy David in my arms for the first time. He was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and the most beautiful blue eyes I'd ever seen. His father, my husband Robert, had walked out on us just 3 months before David was born. Said he wasn't ready to be a father. Said he needed to find himself. What he found was a 22-year-old waitress named Cindy, but that's another story. So there I was, 18 years old, alone, and holding this tiny human who depended on me for everything. I made a promise to him that day. I whispered it right into his little ear while the nurses were cleaning up around us. I said, "David, I will never leave you. I will never let you down. I will be the best mother in the world, and I will love you no matter what." And God help me, I kept that promise, even when it destroyed me. I worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. I cleaned offices at night, worked at a diner during the day, and babysat other people's kids on weekends. I was exhausted all the time, but I never complained. Not once. Because every time I looked at David's face, every time he smiled at me or reached for me with those chubby little hands, I knew it was all worth it. I remember when he was 5 and got invited to his first birthday party. All the other kids were getting dropped off by their dads, and David asked me where his daddy was. I knelt down right there in front of all those other parents and told him, "Sweetheart, some kids have mommies and daddies, and some kids have mommies who love them twice as much. You're one of the lucky ones." He hugged me so tight that day, and I thought my heart would burst. I never dated. I never remarried. I could have. There were men who were interested, good men who would have been wonderful fathers to David, but I was terrified of bringing someone into our lives who might hurt him or leave him like his father did. So I chose to be alone. I chose to dedicate my entire existence to being his mother. When David was 12, he made the middle school football team. I was so proud I cried right there in the stands during his first game. I never missed a single game, not one. I was there cheering him on, rain or shine, even when I had to work double shifts the next day to make up for the lost time. High school was even better. David was popular, smart, and still my sweet boy. He'd come home from school and tell me about his day while I made dinner. He'd help me with groceries, and we'd watch movies together on Friday nights. He was my best friend, my whole world. I started saving money for his college tuition when he was 15. I opened a separate account and put every spare penny into it. I ate ramen noodles for dinner so I could put an extra $20 away. I bought my clothes at thrift stores and drove a car that was falling apart, but I didn't care. My son was going to college, and he was going to have opportunities I never had. When he graduated valedictorian, I was the proudest mother in that auditorium. He thanked me in his speech. He said, "I want to thank my mom, who sacrificed everything to give me everything. Mom, this is for you." I sobbed. I ugly cried right there in front of everyone, and I didn't care. David got accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship. I covered the rest from my savings and took out loans for what I couldn't afford. He was going to study business, and he had dreams of starting his own company someday. I believed in him completely. College was hard on both of us. He was 3 hours away, and I missed him terribly. But he called me every Sunday without fail. We'd talk for hours about his classes, his friends, his hopes for the future. He'd tell me about girls he was dating, and I'd give him advice about treating them right. He was still my boy, even from a distance. Then, in his junior year, he met her, Jessica. The first time he told me about her, I could hear something different in his voice. He was smitten, completely head over heels. He talked about her constantly. Jessica this, Jessica that. She was pre-med, she was beautiful, she was brilliant. She came from a wealthy family in Chicago, and her father was some big-shot surgeon. I was happy for him. I really was. I wanted him to find love, to have the kind of relationship I never had. But there was something in the way he talked about her that made me nervous. It was like he was trying to impress her, trying to be someone he wasn't. I first met Jessica at Christmas during his junior year. David brought her home for the holidays, and I was so excited to meet the girl who had captured my son's heart. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, bought new sheets for the guest room, and cooked for 3 days straight, preparing the perfect Christmas dinner. Jessica was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tall, blonde, with perfect teeth and designer clothes. She was polite enough, but there was something cold about her, something calculating. She looked around our small house with this expression, like she was taking inventory of everything we didn't have. During dinner, she kept talking about her family's vacation home in the Hamptons and their ski trips to Aspen. She mentioned her father's yacht and her mother's charity galas, and every time she said something about her privileged life, I watched David shrink a little bit more. After dinner, I was doing dishes when I overheard her talking to David in the living room. She said, "Your mom seems nice, but this place is so small, and that couch looks like it's from the 80s. David laughed nervously and said something about how we'd always made do with what we had. That's when I knew. That's when I realized that my son was embarrassed of me, of us, of the life we'd built together. The next morning, Jessica barely touched the breakfast I made. She kept checking her phone and making comments about how she couldn't wait to get back to Chicago. When they left, David hugged me goodbye, but it felt different, distant. His phone calls became less frequent after that. He was busy with school, busy with Jessica, busy with internships at her father's hospital. I understood, or at least I tried to. He was growing up, building his own life. That's what kids do, right? He graduated magna cum laude, and I was there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. But during the celebration dinner, I felt like an outsider. Jessica's entire family was there, talking about their connections and their plans for David's future. They talked about job opportunities at prestigious firms, about the importance of networking, about building the right kind of life. And me? I sat there in my JCPenney dress, smiling and nodding, feeling completely out of place. After graduation, David moved to Chicago to be close to Jessica. He got a job at a financial firm, and she started medical school. They got an apartment together in some fancy neighborhood I couldn't even pronounce. Our Sunday phone calls became monthly, then even less frequent. I drove to Chicago once to surprise him for his birthday. I wanted to take him to dinner, just the two of us, like old times. But when I showed up at his apartment, Jessica answered the door. She looked genuinely surprised to see me, and not in a good way. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, not even inviting me in. "David didn't mention you were coming." "I wanted to surprise him for his birthday," I said, holding up the gift I'd brought. I'd saved for months to buy him a nice watch, something professional he could wear to work. Jessica called for David, and when he came to the door, his face went white. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you for your birthday, sweetheart. I thought we could have dinner, just like we used to." David looked at Jessica, then back at me. "Mom, I wish you would have called. We already have plans tonight. Jessica's parents are taking us to this exclusive restaurant downtown." "Oh," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "That's okay. We could do lunch tomorrow instead." "Actually," Jessica chimed in, "we're pretty busy this weekend. Maybe next time you could call ahead?" I looked at my son, waiting for him to invite me in, to tell Jessica that his mother was always welcome. But he just stood there looking uncomfortable. "I understand," I said, handing him the gift. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." I drove home that night crying so hard I had to pull over twice. But I told myself it was just growing pains. He was building his own life, and I needed to respect that. 2 years later, David called me with the news that he and Jessica were engaged. I was happy for him. I really was. But when he told me about the wedding plans, my heart sank. It was going to be a huge affair at some country club in Chicago. Jessica's family was paying for everything, which I was grateful for because I couldn't have afforded it. But when David started talking about the guest list and the arrangements, I realized something horrible. I wasn't part of the planning, at all. "What about my family?" I asked. "My sister Linda, your cousin Mike." "Mom," David said carefully, "this is going to be a pretty upscale event. Jessica's family has certain expectations." "What does that mean?" It means maybe it would be better if you just brought a date or something. You don't want to be the only single person there. I hadn't dated anyone in over 20 years. I'd given up my entire romantic life to raise him, and now he was telling me I needed to bring a date to his wedding so I wouldn't embarrass him. "David," I said, my voice shaking, "I'm your mother. I don't need a date. I need to be there for you." "Of course you'll be there," he said quickly. "I just thought it might be more fun for you if you had someone to dance with." But I could hear it in his voice. He was embarrassed of me. His single working-class mother who didn't fit into Jessica's perfect world. The wedding was even worse than I'd imagined. I sat in the third row behind Jessica's extended family and family friends. I didn't know a single person there except David. During the reception, I sat at a table with Jessica's elderly great-aunt and some distant cousins who barely spoke to me. I watched my son dance with his new wife, and I was happy for him. But I was also heartbroken. Because I realized that in marrying Jessica, he wasn't just gaining a wife. He was trading up to a whole new family, a whole new class of people, and I didn't fit. After the wedding, things got worse. David and Jessica bought a house in an exclusive suburb, and my visits became even less welcome. When I did come by, Jessica would make passive-aggressive comments about calling ahead, about how busy they were, about how they were trying to establish their own traditions. Then Jessica got pregnant. I was over the moon. I was going to be a grandmother. I started knitting blankets and buying little outfits. I imagined babysitting my grandchild, reading bedtime stories, being the kind of grandmother who spoiled them rotten. But when little Emma was born, I quickly realized that Jessica had other plans. Jessica's mother, Patricia, was there constantly. She was the one helping with night feedings, the one giving advice about baby care, the one buying the expensive stroller and the organic baby food. I was allowed to visit, but always with restrictions. I couldn't pick Emma up without asking permission. I couldn't feed her or change her diaper. I was treated like a distant relative instead of a grandmother. When Emma was 6 months old, I offered to babysit so David and Jessica could have a date night. Jessica looked at me like I'd suggested juggling fire near the baby. "That's very sweet of you, Margaret," she said in that condescending tone she'd perfected. "But Emma is very particular about her routine. Maybe when she's older." But Emma never got older enough for me to babysit. There was always some excuse. She was teething. She was going through a phase. She was too attached to her regular babysitter. The regular babysitter, by the way, was Patricia's friend's daughter who charged $30 an hour. I watched my son's life from the outside, like looking through a window at a party I wasn't invited to. I saw pictures on social media of family trips I wasn't included in, holiday celebrations I wasn't invited to, milestone moments I wasn't part of. And David? He just went along with it. He never stood up for me, never insisted that I be included. He'd call me occasionally, these quick obligation calls where he'd update me on his life like I was a distant acquaintance. The breaking point came when Emma turned 3. I called David to ask about her birthday party, assuming I'd be invited. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "About that, Mom," he said finally. "Jessica's planning this elaborate princess party at the country club. It's going to be mostly her family and Emma's little friends from preschool. But I'm her grandmother," I said. I know. But the thing is, Emma doesn't really know you that well, and Jessica's worried she might be shy around people she's not comfortable with. My granddaughter didn't know me because I'd never been allowed to get to know her, and now that was being used as a reason to exclude me from her birthday party. "David," I said, and I could hear my voice breaking, "I'm your mother. I love you, and I love Emma. I don't understand why I'm being pushed out of your lives." "You're not being pushed out," he said, but he sounded tired, like this conversation was a burden. "You're being dramatic. We're just busy people with busy lives." "Too busy for your mother?" "Mom, I can't do this right now. I'm at work, and I have a meeting in 5 minutes. We'll talk later, okay?" But we didn't talk later. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. My calls went unanswered. My texts were ignored. When I finally did reach him, he was always rushing off to something more important. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was Jessica, not David. She asked if she could come over to talk to me about something important. I was so excited to see her, thinking maybe she wanted to finally include me more in their lives. She came over on a Saturday afternoon, dressed in her usual designer clothes, carrying an expensive purse. She sat on my old couch, the same one she'd made fun of years earlier, and looked at me with this expression of fake sympathy. "Margaret," she said, "I think we need to have an honest conversation." "Of course," I said, offering her coffee, which she declined. "I know you love David and Emma very much," she continued, "but I think it's time you understood that your constant need for attention is putting a strain on our marriage." I felt like I'd been slapped. My need for attention? You're always calling, always wanting to visit, always trying to insert yourself into our lives. David feels guilty about it, and it's causing problems between us. "I'm his mother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, you are. And you did a wonderful job raising him. But he's a grown man now with his own family. It's time to let go." "Let go?" "What I'm suggesting is that you step back. Way back. Let us live our lives without the constant pressure of your expectations. If you really love David, you'll give him the space he needs to be happy." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. "Are you telling me to stay away from my son?" "I'm telling you that if you continue to be this needy, clingy presence in our lives, you're going to lose him completely. He's already talking about how overwhelming you are, how guilty you make him feel. Is that really how you want your relationship with your son to be?" I felt something break inside me. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, I was being told that my love was a burden. "Does David know you're here?" I asked. Jessica smiled, and it was the coldest smile I'd ever seen. "This was his idea, Margaret. He asked me to talk to you because he couldn't bring himself to do it. He said you'd probably take it better coming from me." That was the moment I realized that my son, the boy I'd given my entire life to, had sent his wife to break up with me like I was some unwanted girlfriend. "I see," I said, standing up. "Thank you for making things so clear." Jessica stood too, looking pleased with herself. "I'm glad you understand. This is really for the best, for everyone." After she left, I sat in my living room and cried harder than I had since the day David's father walked out on us. But these weren't just tears of sadness. They were tears of rage. I had given my son everything: my youth, my chances at love, my money, my dreams, my entire life. And he had thrown me away like trash because his wife found me embarrassing. That night, I made a decision. If David wanted to pretend I didn't exist, if he wanted to erase me from his life, then I was going to show him exactly what he was losing. I was going to make him understand that actions have consequences and that some betrayals are unforgivable. I started by calling my lawyer. Yes, I had a lawyer. When you're a single mother with no one to depend on, you learn to protect yourself. I'd used him to handle my will, to help me with tenant issues when I rented out my basement, small things like that. I told him I wanted to change my will. Everything I owned, everything I'd saved, was going to charity. David wouldn't get a penny. But that wasn't enough. That was just the beginning. See, there were things about my son's success that he'd never told his precious wife. Things about how he'd gotten his first job, how he'd been able to afford that fancy apartment, how he'd managed to save up for the down payment on their house. When David graduated from college, he'd been drowning in student loan debt. He had a job offer, but he needed money for first month's rent, last month's rent, security deposit, and work clothes. He came to me, desperate, and I gave him $15,000. It was almost everything I had saved. But that's not what he told Jessica. He told her he'd gotten a signing bonus from his job. He lied to her about where the money came from because he was embarrassed that his mother had to help him. The job itself. He got it because of a connection I'd made. One of the ladies I cleaned offices for had a son who worked at the same financial firm. I swallowed my pride and asked her to put in a good word for David. She did, and that's how he got the interview that led to his career. The down payment on their house? David had come to me again, this time asking to borrow $25,000. He promised he'd pay me back, but of course he never did. And again, he lied to Jessica about where the money came from. He told her it was from his savings and some help from his family friend. I was the family friend. I was the one who made his perfect life possible, and I was the one being erased from it. So I started making phone calls. First, I called Jessica's father, Dr. Richard Carrington. I'd met him at the wedding, and I remembered that he was very concerned about his daughter marrying into the right kind of family. I told him I thought he should know the truth about his son-in-law's background. I explained how David had lied about his financial situation, how he'd borrowed money from his working-class mother and then hidden it from his wife. I told him about the job connection, about how David's entire career was built on help from people he was now too embarrassed to acknowledge. Dr. Carrington was very interested in this information. He asked a lot of questions, and I could tell he was taking notes. Then I called the financial firm where David worked. I asked to speak to the compliance department. I told them I had information about an employee who had potentially misrepresented his financial situation and background during the hiring process. Now, I want to be clear about something. I never lied. I never made anything up. I simply told the truth. The truth about how David had gotten his job, about his financial situation, about the lies he'd told to cover up his real background. The investigation that followed was thorough. They looked into David's hiring process, his financial disclosures, his background check. They found inconsistencies, discrepancies, things that didn't add up. David was suspended pending investigation. When Jessica found out, she was furious, not at the situation, but at David for lying to her about his background. Dr. Carrington had shared our conversation with his daughter, and Jessica was horrified to learn that her husband had been financially dependent on his mother and had lied about it. She was even more horrified to learn that she'd been living in a house that was partially paid for by a woman she'd spent years looking down on. The fights between them were legendary. I know because David started calling me, desperate and panicked. "Mom, what did you do?" he screamed into the phone. "My job is investigating me. Jessica's father hates me, and my marriage is falling apart." "I didn't do anything," I said calmly. "I just told the truth." "Isn't that what you always taught me to do?" "You're destroying my life." "No, David, you destroyed your life when you decided to throw away the person who loved you most in the world. You destroyed your life when you chose to be ashamed of where you came from instead of proud of what we built together." "I was never ashamed of you. You sent your wife to break up with me like I was some embarrassing ex-girlfriend. You excluded me from your daughter's life. You erased me from your history and then built your success on the foundation I provided while pretending I didn't exist." There was silence on the other end of the line. "I loved you more than life itself," I continued. "I gave you everything I had, everything I was, everything I ever dreamed of being, and you threw it all away because your wife found me embarrassing." "Mom, please," he said, and I could hear him crying. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I was stupid. Please help me fix this." "Fix what, David? Your marriage to a woman who convinced you to abandon your mother? Your job that you only got because of connections I made? Your house that you paid for with money I gave you?" "I'll pay you back," he said desperately. "I'll pay you back every penny." "With what money? You're suspended from your job, remember?" The investigation at David's firm concluded that while he hadn't technically committed fraud, he had misrepresented his background and financial situation during the hiring process. In a field where trust and integrity were paramount, this was enough to end his career there. He was fired, quietly, without fanfare. His reputation in the industry was damaged, and finding another job at the same level became nearly impossible. Jessica filed for divorce 3 months later. In the papers, she cited irreconcilable differences and financial deception. She got the house, which was fine because David couldn't afford the mortgage payments anyway. She got custody of Emma, with David getting supervised visitation every other weekend. The supervised visitation was Dr. Carrington's idea. He convinced the court that David was financially unstable and had a history of deception, making him potentially unfit for unsupervised custody of his daughter. David had to move back in with me. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. He was 32 years old, divorced, unemployed, and sleeping in his childhood bedroom. The same bedroom where I used to read him stories and tuck him in at night when he was small. The first few weeks were horrible. He was angry, bitter, blaming me for everything that had happened. He'd sit in his room for hours, making phone calls, trying to find a job, trying to rebuild his life. But slowly, something started to change. Without Jessica's constant influence, without the pressure to be someone he wasn't, David started to remember who he used to be. He started helping around the house. He started cooking dinner for us both. He started talking to me again, really talking, like he used to when he was younger. One night, About 2 months after he'd moved back home, he came into the kitchen where I was making tea before bed. "Mom," he said, sitting down at the table across from me, "I need to say something." I looked at him. This man who was my little boy, who was broken and lost, and finally seeing clearly. "I was wrong," he said simply. "I was wrong about everything. I was wrong to let Jessica convince me that you were a burden. I was wrong to exclude you from my life, from Emma's life. I was wrong to be ashamed of where I came from instead of proud of how far we'd come together." I didn't say anything. I just listened. "You gave me everything," he continued, tears streaming down his face. "You sacrificed your whole life for me, and I repaid you by throwing you away the first chance I got. I don't know how to live with that." "You don't have to live with it," I said quietly. "You just have to learn from it. How can you forgive me? How can you even look at me after what I did?" I reached across the table and took his hand, the same hand I'd held when he was learning to walk, when he was scared of the dark, when he was nervous about his first day of school. "Because you're my son," I said, "and because love isn't something you turn off, even when it would be easier if you could. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, but you have it anyway." We sat there in silence for a long time, holding hands across the kitchen table like we used to when he was little and something was bothering him. David eventually found a new job, not as prestigious as his old one, but honest work at a smaller firm. He started paying me back, slowly, for all the money he'd borrowed over the years. I didn't ask him to, but he insisted. He also started fighting for more time with Emma. It was hard because Jessica and her family had poisoned her against him to some extent. But gradually, Emma started to remember that her daddy wasn't the monster they'd painted him to be. And for the first time in 3 years, I got to be a grandmother. David brought Emma to visit me every weekend he had her. At first, she was shy, unsure of this grandmother she barely remembered. But kids are resilient, and love finds a way. I taught her to bake cookies, the same recipe I'd used when David was little. I read her stories and bought her books. I took her to the park and pushed her on the swings. I became the grandmother I'd always wanted to be. Jessica wasn't happy about this new arrangement. She tried to limit David's visitation even further, claiming that he was exposing Emma to an unstable environment by bringing her to my house. But David had found his backbone. He fought back, hard. He hired a lawyer and demanded his full rights as a father. He documented every interaction, every phone call, every attempt by Jessica to manipulate the situation. The judge wasn't impressed with Jessica's attempts to alienate Emma from her father. In fact, when David presented evidence of how Jessica had systematically tried to erase me from Emma's life, the judge was quite interested. David's visitation was increased to every other weekend plus 1 evening per week. And the supervision requirement was dropped when it became clear that David was a stable, loving father who was simply trying to rebuild his life. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. You might be thinking that what I did was wrong, that I destroyed my son's life out of spite and revenge. And maybe you're right. Maybe I did let my pain and anger drive me to actions that were destructive and cruel. But I want you to understand something. I didn't set out to destroy David's life. I set out to reveal the truth about who he really was and where he really came from. If that truth destroyed the life he'd built on lies and shame, then maybe it wasn't a life worth having. The man who had thrown me away like trash, who had let his wife convince him that his mother was a burden, who had built his success on my sacrifices while pretending I didn't exist, that man needed to learn what it felt like to lose everything. And he did learn. He learned what it felt like to be abandoned by the people he thought loved him. He learned what it felt like to lose his job, his house, his status, his security. He learned what it felt like to have his child taken away from him. But he also learned something else. He learned that the woman he'd thrown away was the only person who would still be there when everything else fell apart. He learned that the love he'd taken for granted was the only love that was unconditional. He learned that family isn't about status or money or fitting in with the right people. Family is about the people who love you when you're at your worst, who forgive you when you don't deserve it, who stand by you when everyone else walks away. Today, David and I are closer than we've ever been. We have dinner together every Sunday, just like we used to when he was in college. We talk about everything: his job, his hopes for the future, his relationship with Emma, his regrets about the past. He's dating someone new now, a teacher named Sarah who thinks it's wonderful that he's so close to his mother. She comes to Sunday dinner sometimes, and she always asks about my week, about my life, about my interests. She treats me like a real person, not an inconvenience. Emma is 5 now, and she calls me Grandma Maggie. She stays with me sometimes when David has to work late, and those are some of the happiest moments of my life. She's smart and funny and kind, and she looks just like David did when he was her age. I'm not proud of what I did. I'm not proud of the pain I caused or the destruction I unleashed, but I'm not sorry either. Because sometimes the only way to save someone you love is to show them what they're losing. Sometimes the only way to teach someone the value of unconditional love is to let them experience life without it. David lost everything because he chose to throw away the person who loved him most. But in losing everything, he found something more valuable than money or status or social acceptance. He found his way back to himself and back to me. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have someone in your life who loves you unconditionally and you've been taking that love for granted, please don't wait until it's too late. Don't wait until they're gone, or until you've pushed them so far away that finding your way back becomes a journey through destruction and pain. Love the people who love you. Honor the sacrifices they've made for you. Don't let pride or embarrassment or the opinions of others convince you to throw away the most precious thing you have. Because someday, when all the fair-weather friends are gone and all the superficial relationships have crumbled, the people who truly love you will be the only ones left standing. Make sure you haven't driven them away before that day comes. And if you're the one being thrown away, if you're the one being treated like trash by someone you love, remember this: you deserve better. You deserve to be valued, to be appreciated, to be loved without conditions or shame. Don't let anyone convince you that your love is a burden. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're too much, too needy, too demanding for wanting to be part of their life. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let someone learn what life is like without you. It's painful, it's heartbreaking, and it might destroy everything in the process. But if they're worth having in your life, they'll find their way back to you. And if they don't, then you'll know that you deserved better all along. My name is Margaret, and this is my story. It's not a pretty story, and I'm not a perfect person, but it's the truth about what happens when love turns to pain, when gratitude turns to shame, and when the people we die for decide we're not worth living for. Thank you for listening. And remember, the people who love you unconditionally are the rarest treasures in this world. Don't throw them away like trash because you might not get the chance to pick them up again.